Well, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about our thoughts. So let's just dive right in. So this, of course, is one of our tools of creation that we talked about in the first lesson. And I just want to share some random thoughts about thoughts, if you will, right? So our thoughts, first of all, it's estimated that we have roughly 6,000 thoughts per day. Think about that in terms of a timing standpoint, how many an hour you have to have. We are constantly being bombarded by thoughts. Most of the time, and we're going to talk about this in the lesson today, we are unaware or unconscious of what our thoughts are. At times, thoughts happen in groups around a particular subject. And lastly, the majority of our thoughts come from our beliefs and perceptions. Again, that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So let's dive in. So, again, where do our thoughts come from? So, I want to spend a little bit of time today and dive into a topic called cognitive behavioral theory. Now, before your eyes roll in the back of your head and you go, oh my God, Mike, are you serious? It's like, yeah, but I'm not going to do a super deep dive. But the stuff we're going to dive into is really, in my opinion, important so that you have a general understanding of like what's going on inside of my brain. Because when we become aware of it, then we can do something about it. So bear with me as we go through these next few slides, but I think you'll appreciate it when we're done with them. Okay. So cognitive behavioral therapy says, it is, excuse me, the study of the connection between the minds and our behavior. So there is a connection between what we think and what we do. And it might be a really good idea to know what that connection or how that connection works. So let's talk about that. What cognitive behavioral therapy says, or theory says, is we have thoughts. Those thoughts create emotions. Those emotions basically dictate what our behavior or non-behavior is. As a result of those behaviors, we have a bodily sensation. So we feel a sensation based off those behaviors. And more than likely, what happens is that just reinforces the original thought. So we're kind of got this loop thing going on. And you're going to see where there's a couple loops things going on today in our conversation. So that was that model, the cognitive behavioral theory. But back in the 80s, Bruce Lipton wrote his famous book called The Biology of Belief. And he made a very powerful statement in here. And when I read about it, I was like, oh my God, that changes everything. Well, what did he say? He said, our thoughts actually come from our beliefs and our perceptions. So when I thought about that, then I'm like, well, wait a minute, then we've got to change the model. So it doesn't start with our thoughts, actually. It actually starts with our beliefs and our perceptions. Then our thoughts, then our emotions, then our behaviors, then our bodily sensations. So everything is coming from our beliefs and our perceptions. So then really the cognitive behavioral theory is changed, right? And so now I'm just calling it the new behavioral theory, right? Because we're missing a piece of it. I don't know what else to call it, right? All right, so let's talk about this a little bit, right? So I want to talk about the difference between a thought and beliefs and perceptions because it's important that you know they are different. A couple of things. A thought is just an idea that you have about something. Belief and perceptions are just thoughts that are repeated over and over again until they form a neural pathway in our brain. That's right. You think them over and over again, and eventually it will become a neural pathway. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. It doesn't matter if that thought is right or wrong. As long as it's repeated, it will form a neural pathway in our brain. Having emotions and feelings, good or bad, will form a belief or perception even faster. The higher the emotion, the faster the belief or perception will be formed. So let's talk for a minute about a neural pathway. What is a neural pathway? So it is the connection formed between the neurons in a brain that allows for neurotransmission. So I just want you to understand it is part of your brain. So when a neural pathway is created, it actually becomes a part of your physical brain, your physical structure. Once a belief perception becomes a neural pathway, it becomes hardwired into the physical brain and becomes very hard to change, right? I often explain neural pathways and the understanding is I bring up the analogy of a two-track. Now, for all of you country people that live out in the country, you've driven down a two-track, which is just a trail, and it's got the two tracks where your tires go down them. Well, you'll notice if you go down some roads that have been two tracks that have been driven a lot, you sink down into those two tracks, and trying to get out of those two tracks becomes extremely difficult. That's why once something comes a belief or perception, well, that's one of the reasons why a belief or perception becomes hard to change, okay? We have an estimated 60 trillion neural pathways in our brains. So literally what the brain is doing is it creates these neural pathways to become efficient. So once something is repeated over and over and over again, the brain goes, oh, I have an idea. Why don't we just make this a neural pathway so we don't have to continuously be firing off these thoughts? And I want you to think about, and we'll talk about that, but I want you to think about even just bodily functions. Why do I need to have this thing constantly thinking about, oh, my heart beating, for example? So what happens is one of the neural pathways that we have is controlling the beat of our heart, okay? So they're really created by a couple of things. They're created by repetition over again. I've mentioned this, and you're going to hear me say it again and again and again. Repetition. So repetition, thoughts over and over and over again, and emotion, strong feelings about something. Those two things are critical to forming neural pathways. Okay. So I'm going to go back and talk about our original beliefs and perceptions, how they are formed. Okay. So now I'm getting into the times in our lives. I'm going back to basic psychology. So, and again, this is not a complete explanation, but I just want to give you a broad understanding of how this works. From the time we're 0 to 7, there's something called the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is part of the brain that's located in the front of the frontal lobe. So it's up here, right? It's implicated in a variety of complex behaviors and greatly contributes to personality development. So in the frontal lobe, it's a lot about our personality development, okay? It regulates our thoughts, our actions, and our emotions. That's interesting. It's one of the last areas to mature and sometimes does not fully develop until your mid-30s. So I just want to talk for a minute about the prefrontal cortex and from 0 to 7. I want you to imagine that from 0 to 7, number one, the prefrontal cortex is not formed, and we are like a great big sponge. So everything that we see, everything that we're looking at, we're just taking in information, and everything is coming in. Everything. It doesn't matter right, wrong, good, bad, anything. We're taking all of that information in. Well, then what happens is from the time we hit roughly 7 years old, and again, it just depends on the person, we start to mature. And I call it, this is the age of reason. And we start to develop our logical thinking and discernment. So all of a sudden, we go from being completely wide open to now we can decide what we want to let into our minds and what we don't let into our minds, right? There now starts to become a definitive difference between our conscious brain and our subconscious areas of the brain. So now we're starting to notice a difference between the two. We can differentiate between the two of them. Beliefs and perceptions that are formed, both good and bad, right or wrong, are locked and are now stored in our subconscious minds and become who and what we are. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. It's worth repeating. Beliefs and perceptions that are formed by the time we're roughly 7 years old, good or bad, right or wrong, are locked and are now stored in our subconscious minds and become who and what we are. A couple other comments. Our original beliefs and perceptions often come from outside of ourselves. So you say, well, where do they come from? Well, I just want you to think about your life. In other words, we don't put them there. So our parents and our family, teachers, preachers, society, environment, social class, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the point that I want to make here is most of our beliefs and our perceptions are not ours. In other words, they are put in there by other things other than us when we're young. Okay. Now, You may be asking, well, who cares, Mike? Why do I care about this? Well, I don't know about you, but all I can do is tell you a little bit about my story for those of you that don't know it. So, as a child, I was the youngest of 4 children. I was taught to be seen and not to be heard. I got all the hand-me-downs. Okay. And lastly, but not least, I was raised in a highly dysfunctional home environment, highly dysfunctional. I'm not going to go into too many details, but I'm sure at some point in time, I'll share that with you, what some of the dysfunction was. All right. So then as a result of that, what happens with my early beliefs and perceptions? Well, let's talk about a few of them. I better keep quiet. I better not draw any attention to myself. I better be happy with whatever I got, no matter what showed up. I don't ever ask for what my real wants or needs are. And whatever I say or want does not matter. It's irrelevant because after all, who am I, right? So I want you to think about that. Because those beliefs and perceptions became locked in my subconscious mind, they continue to impact my life well into my adulthood. And I want to talk about that. So what did it look like when I grew up as an adult? Well, relationships to money. I always had financial struggles through the majority of my life. My love relationships were an absolute mess, and often I would find up getting into codependent relationships. My career, I struggled and would always take low-paying jobs. I was often overworked and underpaid. Boundaries, I struggled setting boundaries. I was taken advantage of often. And often I was afraid to ask for my needs or desires to be met. So I just want you to look at that. All of those original beliefs and perceptions, look at what it caused in my life. And believe me, this is a short list, right? So anyways, I can look back at this now because now I can see it. So one of the things that, I encourage you to do when you start doing this work is to go back in and realize that you have beliefs and perceptions and start looking at them and understanding them and see the impact that they made on your life. And we're going to be talking about in the next section, the next lesson, we're going to be talking about awareness and why it's so important to be aware of what your beliefs or perceptions are. And when I went back and looked at this, it was like, oh my God, like it completely and totally made sense to me, right? So I really want to talk about our mind, or really it's our minds, because we don't just have one, we actually have 3 of them. So you've heard me say this already in today's little talk so far. We've actually have our conscious mind. We've already talked about that. We have our subconscious mind. And then, believe it or not, there is a third one called our super conscious mind. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about those different minds, okay? So one way to understand them is our superconscious mind is really described as the authentic you, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The subconscious mind is what you are, and then the conscious mind is what you do. So if you want an easy description of the 3 different minds, you can say superconscious, the authentic you, subconscious mind, what you are, the conscious mind is what you do. Very easy way to understand it, right? But let's do a little bit of a deeper dive. Okay, let's go into this thing. So I've got this little picture here, and I think it really does a great job of representing the 2 different minds, from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind. In that, if you notice, you can see this is an iceberg, and the iceberg is such a great representation because, as we always hear, that the majority of the iceberg is actually under the water. And so the subconscious mind is really, we are unaware of it. It's under our conscious thoughts, if you will. And so let's just talk about a few of the attributes of the conscious mind. It represents roughly 5% of all the brain activity that is currently taking place. You're aware of these thoughts, that they include logical thinking, short-term memory, your willpower, and critical thinking. All right. So that's your conscious mind. Again, 5% of all brain activity takes place there. Your subconscious mind represents 75% of all brain activity. 95% of all brain activity takes place in the subconscious mind. Obviously, these, you're unaware of them, right? That's why it's called subconscious. You're unaware. They include little things like, oh, I don't know, your beliefs, your perceptions, your emotions, your long-term memory, your values, your protective reactions, your intuition, your imagination, your fears, your traumas, your body, the controls of your body system, and self-image. So, just a few things that your subconscious mind contains. A couple other little points about the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind. The conscious mind, you have easy access to it, right? You can easily change your conscious mind, no problem. The subconscious mind, it's not easy to access it at all. And it's not easy to change it. So let me get this right. Now what I want to do is I want to put all the thoughts together about the subconscious mind, just so you understand why it's so important we understand the subconscious mind. Number one, it's where 95% of all brain activity is. Number two, we are unaware of these thoughts. Number three, it's where all our beliefs and perceptions are located. Go back to the little circle. What happens? Our beliefs and perceptions are the ones that are responsible for our thoughts, which then are responsible for our emotions, which then are responsible for our actions. Oh my God, right? And as a result, we don't have easy access to it. Holy cow. And this is why often we wind up getting stuck in life. And it can actually feel like, for those of you that know, oh, they're also very difficult to change, right? So we don't have easy access to it, and it's very difficult to change. And is why we often feel like, anybody ever see this movie? It's one of my favorite all-time movies. And if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest that you go see it. And my belief is most of us have. But the thing that's so beautiful about this movie is what happens is Bill Murray's character just keeps living. I love the picture of the groundhog. But Bill Murray's character keeps living the same day over and over and over again. And in the beginning of the movie, it's, other than a few little tweaks here and there, he keeps living the same day over and over and over again, until finally all of a sudden he realizes, maybe I need to change a few things. Great movie, fantastic, but that's literally what's happening, and is so reflective of so many people, the way that they live their lives. They're just constantly on Groundhog Day, right? So let's talk about the superconscious mind for just a minute. The superconscious mind, it's non-physical. It speaks in a different language. It uses passion, inspiration, love, excitement, creative thoughts, and ideas. It speaks very quietly. You have to slow down to hear it. And if you don't listen to it, it will not force itself on you. The superconscious mind is, just think about it. Is it really important that we understand the superconscious mind? Well, only if you care about passion, inspiration, love, excitement, creative thoughts, and ideas. So may it be a good idea to understand, number one, we all have a superconscious mind. And number two, we all have access to it. But a lot of people just will not acknowledge a superconscious mind. And as a result of it, they miss out on so many things in life. And so therefore, what happens is, when you're not paying attention to it, you're not listening to these intuitive hits, you're not following your passion, you're not doing the things that really will bring you great joy in your life. So the superconscious mind is super important, and something that, when we look at the different minds, we can't just look at, oh, the conscious mind. We can't just look at the superconscious mind. We also have to take in consideration the superconscious mind as well. Okay. All right. So for our lesson today, the takeaways. Number one, our thoughts often come from our beliefs and perceptions. Our original beliefs and perceptions were formed when we were 0 to 7 years old. Many of those beliefs and perceptions came from outside of ourselves. In other words, we did not put them there. They come from our parents, our teachers, preachers, society, social classes, family, all kinds of stuff, right? But the bottom line is, they come from outside of ourselves. So after the age of 7, those beliefs and perceptions become part of our subconscious mind. Because we're not aware of those beliefs and perceptions, we mostly function on autopilot, right? We are made up of 3 minds: the conscious, the subconscious, and superconscious, which all have different functions. Excuse the typo on that. All right. So what is your homework? Your homework, number one, use your journal or print off one of the goal setting exercises, phase 2 sheet. Remember, in the first one, what we did is we decided what is our goal. And the second one, we are going to start paying attention. We are going to start becoming aware of what are our beliefs, what are our perceptions, and what are our thoughts about that particular goal. So every day, spend 15 minutes writing about those beliefs, perceptions, and thoughts about your particular goal. And last but not least, I'm still going to encourage you to spend 10 or 15 minutes per day doing the intentional meditation exercise. Okay. So that's your homework for the week, and we will see you in the next lesson. Okay.